My name is Sean Casey. I'm the Executive Director of First Five Contra Costa. I want to welcome all of you here today. It's great to see many good friends and good allies in the room today. This is a fantastic group of folks who care about children in our county, and I'm really gratified that you are as concerned about these issues as we are and want to be here today. I think what I'm going to do, since our agenda is pretty tight this morning, I'm going to go ahead and ask our first panelist to go ahead and come on up and take a seat here. I think we're all here. That's right. And so we'll go ahead. And while I do that, I just want to ask folks, at the request of Bruce here, who's here with CCTV, to take out your phones, turn off your ringers. You know the drill. Okay. For everybody's sanity, please, let's do that. Thank you. As I said, our agenda is very full today. We have some amazing folks here to talk about the issue of children and immigration in Contra Costa right now. So they're all more interesting than I am, so I'm going to get out of here real quick. But I want to say a couple things about why First Five is convening this gathering today. Let's be clear. 6 months ago, I'm pretty confident probably none of us imagined what was in store for us when in one night our country made an enormous political and cultural shift of tectonic proportions. Up to then, at First Five, we were working diligently to support families of young children, to promote stronger systems of support for families, and to ensure that every child in Contra Costa has the opportunity to grow and develop to their potential. Since then, as you know, we all have had to make great shifts of our own in our priorities and outlook, in our absorption of news and real news and information and real information, and even especially for the most vulnerable among us in whom we can trust. Over the last several months, we have all heard the increasing level of concern from immigrant communities across the county about the safety of their families. Folks have come to our First Five centers looking for information, for support, and for safety. They've come to your agencies as well, I'm quite sure, even as they also may be disengaging from government benefits, from schools, even from childcare, all from just plain fear. For that reason, we wanted to convene this meeting to address these concerns, to provide some concrete support and resources, and to encourage all of us to speak up for families however we can. The demographic reality in Contra Costa today is that there is no racial or ethnic majority population. There is only diversity. Furthermore, nearly 1/2 of all children in Contra Costa have at least one foreign-born parent. For children in our schools today, there is less immigrant community, only community. The media critic Neil Postman wrote that children are the living messages we send to a time we will not see. What we do for children today and the kind of world we create for them all have significant impact on whether our community, our culture, and our nation will continue on the arc of justice or slip further into some chaos of hate. For that reason, it's up to all of us to ensure that no child should fear their parents or other family members will be taken away from them by government agencies. No parent should fear their child will be bullied. No family should have to weigh the perceived risk of receiving food stamps, filing their taxes, or enrolling in job training. I hope that today you will walk away better informed, bristling with ideas about how you and your agencies can respond for your clients and participants, but most of all, ready to stand up and speak out in whatever way you can to ensure that no child in Contra Costa becomes the unwitting victim of other people's hate. So, that said, I would like now to introduce Reverend Kamal Hassan from the Sojourner Truth Presbyterian Church in Richmond. Pastor Hassan.
Good morning. Oh, did you not have all the coffee you wanted so far this morning? It's one of me. I sound so much louder than you from here. Good morning.
Good morning.
Raise your hand if you really believe it's a good morning. Okay, most of you. So maybe I can help the rest of us begin to feel that way. I would like to thank the members of First Five and the other agencies who invited me to come and speak to you for just a few minutes today, because you have such important work that you have been doing and yet to do to get ready and to continue to be strong in your support for the most vulnerable among us and the most innocent among us. And of course, we are speaking of children. Children who need their parents, children who need to exist in stable home environments, children who need to be able to grow up in safe communities, children who need to be in schools where they are welcome and safe, children who need to exist in a world that welcomes them instead of threatens them. What you do, what you have done is critically important work. It's the way we put our hands and hearts on the future of the world, because the young people whom we interact with, whom are our own children, who are their friends, and the ones in the agencies that you fight for, advocate for, hold hands with, walk through, attempt to address the trauma, the real consequences of being an immigrant in an immigrant hostile environment. It's critically important. It's a moral imperative. But even more than that, for me, it is a sacred trust, one that is made with the Almighty who has created all of us in the image and likeness of God, and who intends that each of us should be treated with love, with welcome, and with wonder. 50 years ago this month, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stood at the Riverside Church in New York and gave a historic speech. That speech, by some, is called A Time to Break Silence. Others call it, can't remember that right now, A Time to Break Silence, and he talked about why he opposed the war in Vietnam. There are many incredible statements that are a part of that speech. But in one part of it, he said that the United States was in need of a revolution of values. He said that it was past time for us to become a person-oriented society rather than a thing-oriented society. That people, their lives and their livelihoods, ordinary, everyday people, should be first in the minds of those who had the power to wage war or to make peace. And I couldn't help but consider the irony when thinking about the current administration in Washington, D.C., where the leader of the government seemed to be more concerned about the quality of chocolate cake than the quality of life for people with brown skin. We need a revolution of values, where the sheriff of our county has been for some time trying to expand the amount of jail beds that are available for immigration, and has so far seemingly made it possible to redirect resources that should be going into communities for mental health services and drug treatment services towards that, is making it so that if you want services, you have to get arrested first. We need a revolution of values. In a situation where the Attorney General of the United States stands at the U.S.-Mexico border and gleefully talks about how he will empower the immigration services to arrest parents and separate them from children and punish communities simply because people don't have documents. He seems to forget that documents don't determine whether or not you are a human being and whether or not you have human rights, no matter where you are. Borders do not take away your human rights. No human being is illegal. We need a revolution of values. It's a time to break silence. It's a time for people like yourselves to stand up and stand with those who have been stigmatized and ostracized, to stand with those who are vulnerable and threatened, to stand with children who have no way of protecting themselves. So today, we encourage you with head and hand and heart to take this sacred trust, this moral imperative. Be the voice crying in the wilderness, if that's what you are. The swimmers against the tide. To say that human life is more important than arbitrary borders, more important than political gamesmanship, more important than the fear of the privileged. Do your work. Help the people. God bless you.
All right, who wants to go after that? Reverend Hassan, thank you so much for being here. We wanted to make sure we were clear that we had representation from the many sectors of our county who are working on this issue, and we were very happy to have our faith sector represented here this morning, and welcome you back anytime. Thank you so much. All right. So I want to move into our first panel this morning, which is going to talk more about the impact on children. We have with us today three really sharp folks on this. Amy Weiss is here from Jewish Family and Children's Services. Vanessa Castillo is here from La Clínica de la Raza, and Angie Junk is here, who is the supervising attorney for the Immigration Legal Resource Center. She's doing double duty on 2 panels this morning, too, so we're very happy to have you here as well. They're each going to speak for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we will be doing questions and answers at the end. And the way that's going to work is that I think there are question cards on your tables. Is that right? Or Post-its. Callie is holding up Post-its. So if you have questions as they're speaking, write them down, hold them up. There will be first 5 staff who will be prowling the premises, looking for these, and then I'll be reading off questions in the last 15 minutes or so if we have time to get in as many as possible of those. So that's the way that works. So don't feel like you don't have a chance to throw something in the conversation. So be writing those down and putting those out there. And I think that's all I need to do. So I think we'll just go in order right down the line here. And so we'll start with Amy Weiss. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to see so many of you here showing interest in this area. It really is heartening to have you here this morning. So just a little bit about myself. I direct the Refugee and Immigrant Services program at Jewish Family and Community Services East Bay. We recently changed our name to Community rather than Children to reflect the work we do, which is primarily in the community. I have a background. I'm a master. I have a MFT. I'm a licensed marriage family therapist for over 30 years. And the last position I had was that I oversaw an international training institute on children and trauma. We taught the model child-parent psychotherapy. And so I have a particular interest in trauma as a clinician. And then that got me into the work of doing work with refugees and immigrants. So I wanted to start a little bit with just a little bit about trauma and stress. So there is a continuum of stress that starts with just your basic stress that we all experience in our day-to-day lives. There's positive stress, negative stress, and then there's costly stress, stress that really is starting to take something from us, drain us. That can move into toxic stress, which can be, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, and then trauma. So there's actually a continuum of stress-related effects on children and adults. So acute trauma is a single trauma, something that happens that one has to recover from. Chronic trauma is multiple traumatic events. You know, domestic violence, community violence, physical abuse even. And then we talk about complex trauma, which is an exposure to chronic trauma that occurs repeatedly, cumulatively, and increases over time. So that can be physical or sexual abuse. It can be war. It could be uprooting of families. It can be human trafficking. And there are profound effects on the development of children's functional ability to function, their brain development, ability to think clearly, ability to reason, ability to learn. So the children that we see in preschools or schools who are having a difficult time could be because they're experiencing a complex trauma. There's historical trauma. So when we talk about historical trauma, we talk about the effects of slavery. We talk about the effects of genocide historically, the Holocaust, massacres, cultural and racial, as well as immigration oppression. So that factors in. So a child actually is given a legacy of trauma from their parents and their grandparents without even having to learn it directly. It's just passed down. Toxic stress I wanted to talk about because this is a particular area that affects children. It's experiences in childhood that can affect brain architecture and brain chemistry. So if the parents, the adult parents or adult caring adults, their job is to buffer children, to protect children from the effects of unrelenting stress. And if parents are unavailable because of their own, for instance, postpartum depression or extreme anxiety or whatever they might be going through, they are less available to provide that protection to young children. This toxic stress can be caused by extreme poverty, neglect, severe maternal depression can weaken the brain. And what we're able to know now about the human brain, and this is recent scientific knowledge that most of you already know. We can look at the brain development, we know how brains develop, and we know that brains develop in the context of a caring adult relationship, that is necessary for children to develop normally. So we can actually see a child's brain in an MRI. We can look at mothers' brains and children's brains and see the effects of trauma. So we have the scientific knowledge. We know, we have the white papers, we know exactly what children need, but what we need is the policies and the resources to provide the support to children so they can develop normally and be able to recoup from trauma, because we have tremendous resilience and neuroplasticity. Our brains can recover and repair, but we need the resources to be able to help parents and help caregivers help the children. So there are protective factors, and there are risk factors for children. Protective factors, we all know, caring, secure attachments, environments that are secure and stable, financial resources, service resources, etc. Risk factors, being a female is a risk factor. Being a little girl, just that is a risk factor. Being young, having a history of exposure to trauma, anxiety in caregivers. So if a mother gives birth to a child and she has a postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety disorder, that child is already at risk right there of developing difficulties with attachment. Most of you know this already. So I was asked to talk a little bit about behaviors that would indicate when a child's in distress. So we'll talk a little bit about toddlers and preschoolers, and we can talk about infants as well. But delays in language development could be caused by neurological, or it could be trauma. Behaviors that alternate from one extreme to another. Frequent and intense tantrums that we see in young children, withdrawing emotionally. Disorganized play. Difficulty with separation can be just triggers to look for. And indiscriminate attachment. When you see little children, trying to glom on to just anybody without caution, that's actually a factor. That's a red warning sign. Atypically controlling in interactions with others. I remember a little girl who came to treatment with me years ago, and she came because she was trying to control all of the children's play at preschool, and that indicated there was something off, and her mother, she actually came to treatment, and her problem was that her mother had a very difficult birth and was separated from the family. The ambulances came, and her mom had medical trauma, and the little girl was traumatized by that. Anyway, with a little bit of support, and she was able to get through that. Low tolerance for frustration, hoarding or collecting toys or food. Very extreme difficulty with transitions. We see that a lot with our little ones. Developmental delays and inability to play. So, and with babies, and I don't know how many of you work with infants? Little babies. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about that then. Difficulty to soothe, inconsolable crying. Unresponsive to caregivers' attempts to soothe. Resistant to touch. Muscle rigidity, motor issues. Difficulty sleeping, night terrors. Feeding challenges. Being listless emotionally. Lack of eye contact. Rocking, head banging. Easily agitated. And difficulty with play, even as an infant. So, we have lots of ways that we can determine, well, what is this neurological? Is it developmental? Is it trauma-based? So we can assume, and I think what we need to start doing is assume that trauma is in the picture for a lot of our children. The good news is that there is resilience, and the factors that can determine resilience are temperament. So some babies come into the world they're easy to comfort. They can tolerate hunger and noise and stimulation, chaotic situations. Some are born with that. Some are very, very sensitive. They're born with extreme sensitivity to any stimulation. I had one of those children, still do, as a 25-year-old daughter. She's still extremely sensitive and very easily overwhelmed. Attuned caregiving. So if a baby comes into the world with a parent or parents or adults who are attuned to caregiving, that is That is a great protective factor for later resilience, ability to deal with stressors that are shaped by caregivers. Calm and experienced caregivers can help difficult to soothe infant, or difficult, if you're a child care provider and you have a preschooler who's having these kinds of difficulties. If the caregiver is calm and soothing, that can make a tremendous difference in a child's life, and even modeling that behavior to the parent, and being able to provide that kind of soothe, caring to the parent and child as a system can be extremely important as an intervention. Fit between the parent and the child, just the temperament of the parent and the temperament of the child. So healthy attachments, children with poor bonding can be less resilient later in life. Children with extended and involved family and neighbors and caring teachers and community have fewer problems following severe trauma, and they can recoup more easily. So that's just a little bit about trauma and stress, and I want people to think about that continuum when you're working with children and when you're working with parents, that all of us as adults experience that continuum as well. So now, our work with refugees and immigrants, we work with refugees a lot. And what we're seeing, the difference between refugees and immigrants is that refugees come with legal status. They have very similar situations. They've had extreme, they're fleeing their lives in their home countries due to persecution, war. There are many reasons to become a refugee, and it takes years to be vetted to become able to travel to the United States as a refugee. And they have legal status to be here, and they're entitled to benefits. So they actually have a little bit more protection than undocumented immigrants, who are also fleeing from extremely dire situations often and difficult circumstances. And they both come from families. Both sets of refugees and immigrants often are families with young children. So immigrants have less of a protection because they don't have legal status. So they are often living in the shadows. Now, in this political environment that we're in, that our speakers have spoken to so articulately, things are much harsher and much more frightening to people. They're avoiding public services, they're avoiding medical appointments, they're avoiding mental health treatment, getting food stamps. All services are being avoided to protect themselves from being deported. So their increase in risk has dramatically increased just in a few months because of our new situation. So many of these children have citizenship, and they are hobbled by serious developmental and educational deficits resulting from their parents living in the shadows. So undocumented parents are viewed as lawbreakers, laborers, or victims. They're seldom looked at as parents raising citizen children, right? I mean, that's not how they're seen. So there's a Harvard education professor, his name is Hirozuka Yoshikawa, who did a study. He found that by the time the children who are raised in the shadows, they're citizens, but they're raised by undocumented parents, by the time they're 2 years old, these children have showed significantly lower levels of language development, cognitive development than children of legal immigrants and native-born parents. So just status is a factor, a risk factor. They have less developed social networks, psychological stress and poverty, anxieties about seeking help. And anxiety can be, if you have an anxious parent, an extremely anxious parent, caring for a young child, that is contagious. It is frightening. So the fright that a parent has is contagious to their children, and they are not buffered by that protective factor that a parent is. That's their job, is to protect their children. So that's right there. We're seeing the effects of parents without legal status. Children are being hurt. Now, that's not even talking about families being separated and the trauma around that. We're just at the beginning of seeing some of these cases, and we're in dire circumstances. And I haven't even talked about how the perception of being Muslim in this country, and that's for refugees as well as immigrants, how somebody's status of race and religion, and how we as Americans have been, we talk about a revolution of values. Americans value immigration and diversity. We know that. You look around this room and we are a diverse country. We value it. We are, and I just want to share some positive, heartening news, because I work with this every single day, and we see, excuse me, the most remarkable response from our community, the most remarkable response of people streaming into our office wanting to support refugees and immigrants, standing up for refugees and immigrants, opening their homes for refugees and immigrants who they've never met, welcoming the stranger, which is our moral, we've been directed by our Judeo-Christian values. And we see it every single day in amazing. I wish I could share that with you, how beautiful it is, because it's the exact opposite of what we're experiencing in our federal government. So we're seeing in-kind donations every day. The Jewish families opening their homes to Muslim families. The silver lining of the Jewish-Muslim relations, I wish I could share with you. It's just gorgeous, just gorgeous. We had a Jewish family open their doors, their home, to a family of 9. Overnight, we put on a request for, we said, we need housing, can you help us? And a Jewish family responded, we have a home, they can come move in with us for 3 months. We have a Jewish family that opened their homes to a Syrian family for a year, and their little 4-year-old son and the 4-year-old son of the Jewish family went to preschool with the 4-year-old Arabic-speaking little boy, and now he speaks fluent English within a month of being here. So we see these beautiful stories day in, day out it counters the toxic message that we're getting from our federal government. I wanted to share that with you. And it's just like you showing up today. You're interested, you want to stand up. And the other thing about our agency, before I hand it over the mic, is that Jewish Family and Community Services East Bay is involved in a lawsuit. We are suing Donald Trump directly with the support of the ACLU. Yeah. So we stand up every day for refugees and immigrants, not only ourselves, but with the support of the communities of Contra Costa and Alameda County. So thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? My name is Vanessa Castillo. I am from La Clínica de la Raza. I've been there for on and off 5 years. I have an LCSW and PPSC. I've had the pleasure of working in the Mount Diablo Unified School District, as well as working in Alameda County agencies as well. But I'm here representing La Clínica today with honor. I wanted to thank everyone for being here today. It's a very passionate topic, a very passionate time, and to be here in this county and seeing so many people coming together to represent and support our communities is just speechless and emotional at the same time. I wanted to let you know that La Clínica is very passionate about working with all underserved populations. And I know today's topic is about the struggles of the immigrant political climate taking a toll on our communities, but La Clínica has really strived to improve the quality of life overall, and specifically also to provide appropriate and high quality care, and especially to the access to health care. And that means medical, pediatric services, behavioral health services, adolescent services, dental services, prenatal, postnatal services. And I'm here speaking on behalf of all those departments, and then we'll talk a little bit specifically about how the political climate has impacted our mental health, behavioral health services. So the current immigration policies have impacted our communities through President Trump's executive orders. This has heightened his immigration enforcement with raids and sweeps. This has created distress with our DACA uncertainty. This has threatened our Affordable Care Act. It has threatened to take away basic privacy protections to due process. Things like scaring our communities with Muslim ban words and social media password releases is really creating a distress within just a couple months. I mean, this just turned over within months, overnight. How these policies are in fact impacting our families is, in general, everyone is on high alert, which creates symptoms of anxiety and trauma and fear. People are going back into the shadows. They are disengaging from their families, from their communities, which creates depression, isolation, low functionality. They're not functioning in their home, they're not functioning in their community, and they're withdrawing from being productive residents. They're afraid to report crimes. They are afraid to report to the police and receive support and protection against domestic violence, against rape, against community violence, against child abuse. And something I've seen recently is custody and visitation support. And so this creates a constant fear and distress. We've also seen patients report to us that they're afraid to go to the emergency rooms and afraid to go to the courtrooms and afraid to connect to basic resources, as Amy was saying, such as CalWORKs food stamps, resources that are there to help our families and our patients and our communities be resilient and overcome. So how we have specifically seen these impacts at La Clinica. I've went around and asked various departments, how have you guys, because I work in the behavioral health department, and you know, on the day-to-day grind, you can kind of get stuck in your little office doing your work. So I went out and I asked various departments, how have you guys seen these policies impacting your work? So registration department, which if you think of the word registration, register, can be very triggering. So what our registration department, our HSS workers have said is that they have seen a disenrollment or lack of enrollment in renewing their Medi-Cal. They don't want to, a lot of people think that they're gonna be a public charge, and Medi-Cal is not a public charge. They are afraid to renew their registration with us. They hear registration, they're like, I don't wanna register for anything, I don't wanna be part of any registration. And they are afraid to, well, recently, I think it was in October that our patients were allowed to renew their Medi-Cal and also apply for food stamps at the same time. And from October to December, the ladies were saying, yes, everybody was renewing and filling out and applying. And just at the end of January, everyone has said, no, thank you. I don't want to apply. Let's see here. Some people are not coming to their appointments. We've always struggled with an often no-show rate, but we've seen some patients, say, no, I don't want to go to my doctor's appointment. I don't want to drive there. I'm afraid that driving my car will put me at risk. I personally run with some support, not just me, but a social work intern and I run a depression anxiety group, an open depression anxiety group, and patients there have reported that they don't want to drive to our appointments. They prefer to take a 2-hour bus ride. They feel safer on the bus where they can't be pulled over, which could put them at risk for maybe missing their appointment, being late to their appointment, and having to spend money, on the fare ride, which cannot, it's getting pricey. It takes a toll on their budget. The patients that are coming in and are seeing our doctors and that are renewing their cards and renewing their membership with us are coming in and presenting with symptoms of depression, anxiety, difficulty sleeping, change in their appetite, troubling in their relationships with their families or coworkers. And so we've seen a higher increase in referrals to the mental health, behavioral health department. We are trying to support our families as best as possible. However, the struggle is recently that in the past we've been able to say, yes, CalWORKs, food stamps, all these services are there. You're safe. It's okay. Apply for the U visa. Apply for the T visa with confidence. I was able to say, it's okay. You're going to be okay. It's going to be safe. But now, as I'm promoting our resources, there is that doubt. There is that, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know the risk anymore. And so that creates some distress, even us as providers. recently, yesterday, I had a patient, a mother of a 9-year-old who is an undocumented mother. Her son was born here, and she was married to a citizen. He owned his home and recently passed away of an unexpected heart attack. And so she was left with, you can only imagine, unfinished business, and he didn't leave a will. And she said, I'm afraid, I've been stuck. I've been not able to sleep. I've been unable to think. Resources are coming to me. I have a lawyer who's willing to work with me. I have, a court date. But I can't organize my mind because I'm undocumented. And I know my son was born here, and he has rights to inherit everything that his father intended to leave for us, but I'm afraid. Because if they discover that I'm not born here or that I don't have status here, what would that mean for me? Would I be deported and he stay here? Would he have to stay here by himself? Would we have to go together and then come back later? And so the struggle is real. The struggle is very challenging and very rough. So how La Clinica is helping our families? First, I want to say La Clinica has been pretty resilient with being a nonprofit agency in the Bay Area for over 50 years, or almost 50 years. We've been pretty resilient in surviving the political climates that have impacted California over the 50 years. And along with us being resilient, I want to say that our patients and our communities have been pretty resilient as well. This is not the first time we have been struck with these types of scary messages from our government. La Clinica has always had a welcoming environment with welcoming signs from the lobby all the way to when you're roomed with your provider, with your doctor. Signs and pictures of our patients from all over the world. We've tried to continue to reach out and staff bicultural, biracial, bilingual staff to able to provide culturally sensitive and culturally appropriate and linguistic appropriate services to all our patients from all over the world. And behavioral health, mental health services have always been there. We have been there to listen to the stories, listen to the struggles. One of the common struggles that our patients disclose to us is the trauma that they flee, the reason why they come to the United States, the reason why they come for a better life. And in the past, we continue to provide those legal resources, hearing their stories and looking for the opportunity to connect to legal resources, to legal representation. We have collaborated with Catholic Charities of the East Bay, Bay Area Legal Aid, International Institute of the Bay Area, Family Justice Law Center, I can go on and on. First Five, Contra Costa County Children's Mental Health. We have confidently referred and forwarded our patients over to all of these amazing agencies. We have offered and provided our services to little to no cost for mental health services when patients have no other access to severe for their mental health symptoms. Let's see, we have continued to and always have linked to CalWORKs food stamps, reduced lunch programs at schools, informed families of their rights to IEPs, 504 plans, constantly educating our families about these services that we all in this room provide. We have also continued to provide our services as evidence-based practice, along with practice-based evidence, because just because it's evidence-based doesn't mean it's always appropriate for our patients. So it's also just what we've learned and what we know works because we do the work every day. And lastly, I'd like to inform you guys of what La Clinica has recently started to do since the political climate has changed. We have provided psychoeducation around stress, trauma, anxiety, and depression, and reactions, and how these have been symptoms reacting to the political climate. not just to obviously the behavioral health staff and the medical staff, but now the front desk, the lobby, our janitors, everybody is aware about how these symptoms are presenting. So when you have a difficult patient who's in distress over the phone, be patient, be kind, be sensitive. We have promoted a Know Your Rights and legal clinics all over, posting them in the lobby, posting them in the patient rooms. We have them now on our intranet, where every staff from every level of service can go onto our front website and see right there what legal services are out in the community, from Alameda County, Solano County, and Contra Costa County. We have made bigger welcome signs in all languages. And we have, lastly, created 2 new signs, which is a restricted area. Now, every front door has a sign that says, you are not allowed to enter the building unless you are accompanying a patient or you are a patient. Otherwise, you are not allowed to enter the room. And we have also created new forms to report hate incidences. And so we've done a lot of things. We have a lot of work still to do. And we hope that all these services and all these messages continue to help our patients feel safe. So thank you very much, and I appreciate the time here.
Just want to remind people, questions, if you have questions, write them down. I'm going to get our prowling staff. There's one over there. Start prowling, staff.
Hi, my name is Angie, and I'm a lawyer. I've been a lawyer for 12 years at the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, and we're based in San Francisco and in Washington, D.C. And our mission is to make law and policy accessible to all, to ensure that people can advocate on behalf of immigrants and that immigrants themselves are empowered to have the information that affects them. And through our work that we've done, obviously, we've touched upon just the great fear that are in these communities. So great that we know that even service providers that have worked with immigrants for so long have seen that the change in the behaviors, right? Inability to kind of access services or even to speak to people. And so for us, we just feel like it's really important to clarify misinformation out there and to do the best that we can to empower immigrants, because despite what this administration says, there are legal and constitutional limits to what they're doing. And I think that it's so hard when you hear media every single day to say immigrants don't belong here, they're creating a public safety crisis, and basically anything that they do, is unlawful here, which is not true. And I think we're already seeing this, and it comes in different forms, but I know just even from the litigation, people probably heard, when people saw everyone go to the airports and the Muslim ban, there has been a lot of lawsuits and other kind of pushback, and it's clear that this administration pushes the limits on what it can do and does a lot of things that are illegal, even though it keeps pointing to immigrants and saying, you're unlawful here. And so that's what our goal is here. So I wanted to just talk right now and be very practical about the 3 steps that we have been talking about in terms of being prepared in this current climate legally. And some of this can give some people a little bit more hope. And we write lots of resources on this. I'll share some of the resources that exist. There are 3 steps that we generally talk about. And one is knowing your rights. Number 2 is figuring out your immigration options. And number 3 is how do you prepare, even for the worst, making childcare plans? What does that look like? Not to just live in fear, but to understand that you have something in place so that if something happens, you know where your child is going. You have family members that can support. So I'll take each one in step and just kind of share some examples of what this looks like. And this is based on a family preparedness plan that we put together that's 14 pages and has a lot of samples in here and checklists. And I believe a link is in some of the materials, and it's on our website as well. The first thing is really, and people talk about this all the time, is knowing your rights. The fact is, the federal government relies on lying to immigrants, coercion, doing all sorts of tactics that put people in a situation where they feel that they have to give up rights that they have. And the reality is that both documented people that have legal status as well as undocumented people all have rights in this country. And those are constitutional rights that they should assert. And when people don't assert their rights and give in to the federal government, it makes their job very easy. So I'll just give you a couple of examples here, is that every immigrant has the right to remain silent. If you don't remain silent and you give some pieces of information, they absolutely use that against you. And then it kind of becomes a slippery slope. You also have the right, you have the most protection. Everyone in this room has the most protection when you are in the privacy of your own home. So even when any police or ICE knocks on the door, you have to give them consent to let them come in. You open the door. And it's really important, before opening that door, you want to make sure that they have a warrant, a judicial warrant, not any kind of warrant, that allows them to even walk through that door. And we, in a time like this when there's such great fear, we have to hold law enforcement to its burden of actually following the law. And they'll do everything they can that they don't have to do that because it makes it easier for them. And I'll just give you an example of what impact this can have. Many of you may have heard, it was one of the first stories that came out on the Deferred Action of Childhood Arrivals. For those of you who don't know that program, it allowed certain people that are under the age of 16 who've come here, have, done certain steps and have had an education or are currently pursuing an education to be here through a discretionary program. They can get work permits, and the federal government says, we're not going to deport you. We know you're undocumented, but we'll let you be here. And what happened in the Washington area was that the federal government, ICE, had interest in a father. They went to the father's house, they knocked on the door, they opened the door. There wasn't a warrant, but they opened the door. And when you open the door, you're opening the door for these police to question anybody. And what they did was not only decide they wanted to take the dad, they took the dad, but they started to question his sons. And he has two sons, and both of them had DACA. And one of the sons that had DACA refused to speak to ICE. He did not get arrested. The other son who had DACA decided to speak to ICE, and they arrested him and detained him. That was the first case that we had heard of, a DACA, where they detained him in immigration custody. They interrogated him. They forced him to admit that he had gang affiliation, which he had never had any gang affiliation. And they basically trumped in the news, made up in the news that he had a criminal record, which he had none. So this thing is, when you start talking, they start to make up things. They start coercing you in a way which is really hard for a lot of people, for any of us, whether you're a U.S. citizen or not. When you start speaking and they say, we're going to do horrible things to you, you continue to go down that path. And so it's just really important that many of you share that information, have people watch videos, practice. I mean, that's really essential. A lot of people have to hear this multiple times. One resource that we have, I don't know if anyone has seen this, we have this red card. And this red card is laminated, and it allows people to carry in their wallet. And on one side, it's all in Spanish, and it tells people what their rights are. And it says, you have constitutional rights to do certain things. And on the other side, it is language that is given to a law enforcement officer and says, I do not wish to speak with you or answer your questions. I do not give you permission to enter your house. And so people don't have to speak. They can actually give this to someone, and they don't have to say that. Quickly, I do want to say that people have immigration options to stay in the United States as well. We have estimates up to 14 to 30% of undocumented people have a path to get legal status and don't know it. And that's because there's fraud in the communities, or they are so afraid to talk to people. And if we can get them on a path to legal status, they can protect from deportation. The final thing is child care planning, which we're really talking about here, and we have a lot of information in here. And there's informal to most formal planning, and I want to give you a couple of options. The most informal way that you can, plan if you're deported or detained is to have a verbal agreement with people that will take care of your kids for a little while. And this is informal and easy, and there's no documents assigned, but also the downside of this, that person has no legal authority to make decisions based on school and medical on that child. The more popular way of actually dealing with this now is through the caregiver's authorization affidavit. We have the form in here. We have instructions of a Q&A on that. And it basically gives the person who's taking care of the child the authority to make decisions on school and medical issues. You have to be a relative to be able to make medical decisions in this case. But the good thing is it doesn't affect parental rights, but it does allow someone who's in the United States to help make critical decisions on behalf of a child. And there's no notary required here. Basically, this is an agreement between a parent and a family member, and you can negotiate this yourself and have the forms ready to go. The final thing I would say is the most formal way of actually having a child care plan is called guardianship, and that requires a court process. That may be intimidating for some family members. It gives full legal and physical custody of a child to someone else. So that is transferring legal rights. It does not suspend a parental's rights, but there is a process there and there's some information here. My final thing I would like to say is just to dispel a myth. If anyone is talking about a power of attorney, you do not want to use a power of attorney to designate physical, legal custody of children. It's not effective in that way. It's really used for business decisions and finances. It is not used to transfer legal custody. And we're seeing a lot of people create these powers of attorney, pay hundreds of dollars to notaries to do this, and it's not going to have legal effect.